Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Governance and Priorities meeting for May 3rd, and welcome to another virtual council meeting. Members of council, before you, there is a agenda presented. I'm just going to ask everybody to make sure that your mics are muted, your video is off unless you're presenting or speaking, and please text me for a speaking order. As usual, our recording secretary will be counting the votes and lowering the hands. And with that, Deputy Mayor, please.
Yes, Your Worship, the Town Council adopt the May 3rd, 2021 Governance and Priorities meeting agenda as presented.
Yeah. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and call the question. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, there's 7 hands in favor.
Okay. Thank you. Moving to number 3 of our agenda is a public input session. This is the time that we let residents
Your Worship, I believe your mic is accidentally muted.
Okay, well, there we go. Is that better?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay. Thank you. And then move on to number 3 of our agenda, which is the public input session. This is the time that we allow residents to address issues or concerns or just share things with council that are not on the current agenda. This is fully virtual, so Town Manager, has anybody submitted anything to be read into the records?
Thank you, Your Worship. We have not received any requests for the public input session.
Thank you. So moving on to number 4 is the presentations and delegations. Today we have 1 presentation. This is our generally quarterly update from our MLA, Cyril Turton. So welcome to Council Chambers, our MLA, and it's glad to have you. And the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship, for allowing me to come out and just kind of have a nice chat with Stony Plain Council. Always a pleasure to talk with some of my former municipal colleagues and just kind of give an update about some of the provincial projects that are happening here in the great town of Stony Plain. So I guess to kickstart, I just want to talk a little bit about highways, talk a little bit about roads, obviously talk a little bit about COVID, vaccine response, and then obviously open up for questions from council. So I guess a couple quick updates about 779. I just want to say for the record is that I know I was talking to Alberta Transportation today about updates for 779. I know many people in the town are obviously anxious to have that work completed. And so obviously they've been a little bit delayed this spring, just kickstarting it. It is just May 3rd right now, but they are going to be working on it here pretty quick, and construction completion is expected for October of this fall, which I know many people are going to be obviously very happy with. Again, that's subject to weather and just running into unmarked utilities like they did last year, but fingers crossed 779 will finally be completed. Another big infrastructure project in that I know many Stony Plain residents are obviously concerned about is about 16A that comes through Stony Plain. And so I know one of the questions that came to me from some residents were about what maintenance plans are happening. There's no current capital plan upgrades for 16A. However, there is going to be ongoing selective surface patching on Highway 16A and Highway 16. And then that work will just be ongoing as needed. And then the other project in the area is Highway 628. There's obviously interim improvements will continue in 2021 to upgrade the existing alignment. And then they're going to start planning and doing some extra studies regarding the highway or stretch of 628 from the paved portion just south of Spruce Grove all the way to the Anthony Henday. And so that's going to be an actual massive realignment of that road, but some of that pre-planning work is going to take place. And as you know, there's a lot of infrastructure upgrades to that last year, I believe it was, just making sure that some of the lower spots were brought up to grade to stop some of the drainage issues that were happening, and also just to improve some of the sight lines. As many people that are watching this know that a stretch of Highway 628 where it turns to gravel south of Spruce Grove, you know, there was definitely some safety concerns there that I brought up to Minister McIver. And he was happy to make sure that it got received the attention that it deserved. A couple other projects that are happening in the town. So Stony Plain Central School, there's a lot of activity happening there. Very excited to have that work ongoing. We were actually expecting to have Minister Panda and Minister LaGrange come out to Stony Plain for an actual sod turning ceremony, just to kind of kickstart the construction that's going to be there. But just to the ongoing COVID-19 protocols and procedures, there was just some anxiety that we just couldn't quite get the required people there with under 10 people. Which is the limit for an outdoor gathering, and that's obviously including school trustees as well. But I am hoping and expecting the ministers to be able to come out this summer for kind of that kickoff for that project, which I know many of you are going to be excited about because it's going to be a key part of revitalizing that entire downtown in Stony Plain. As well, I guess I just want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 restrictions. As you know, last week, our government released a number of highly specialized COVID restrictions with a new criteria for a number of municipalities, 8 at the time. I believe there's been a couple more added since that list. And this is really part of the regional approach planning that many government MLAs, including myself, have been advocating for. Some of the health regions before were so massive in scope, they're almost the size of small countries in Europe. And communities like Stony Plain, Spruce Grove were being automatically lumped in with large urban areas like Edmonton. And so these new targeted approach for specific municipalities based upon thresholds that the Premier talked about today as well as last week really make sure that those hotspots in the province that have the higher numbers with a larger base amount will have a higher amount of restrictions, and then obviously areas that don't fit within that criteria will have a higher amount of freedom. And Stony Plain, Spruce Grove, and Parkland County are at this point are not we're not given any additional restrictions that they have to follow, but our numbers are still worrying, and we have to make sure that we stay vigilant in following health restrictions and rules that are in place to make sure that Stony Plain does not go over that threshold in which schools potentially students would have to be going to at-home learning, and a whole host of different restrictions would have to take place. But we're not there yet, and I have faith that the fine outstanding residents of Stony Plain and Spruce Grove are going to be following those rules to make sure that we can stay under that threshold. I know a lot of residents always talk to me about vaccination schedules, so I've been actually appointed by the Premier to serve on a couple additional COVID-19 response committees. And so as part of those committees, we get updates about vaccination schedules around the province, and it is still my expectation and belief that we will be hitting close to that 75 to 80% vaccination rate provincially by the end of June. That's easily within the threshold where many restrictions can be released right across the province. So we are in the final stages of this COVID-19 pandemic. We just obviously have to be aware of, right now we're dealing with variants, so we have a hard couple weeks that we have to be able to undergo for the next little while, but it is my full expectation that when the Premier said the best summer ever, that we are going to be able to hit that goal. And so, Mr. Mayor, at this point, I kind of did a broad overview, but I'd like to turn it over to the rest of Council to ask any other questions that they may have. So thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you for your presentation, the update of what's happening in our contingency, and appreciate that. Just maybe I'll start off before members of council start weighing in. As you mentioned about kind of the vaccine supply and having about 75 to 80% of residents within Alberta be vaccinated by the end of June so that we can get to some kind of normalcy. We're also hearing stories about vaccine supply issues and stuff. How is that going to affect the overall vaccination of our province?
Yeah, obviously vaccine supply is something that I will admit keeps me up at night. That is completely under the purview of the federal government, and we're completely dependent upon the federal government from releasing the amount of supply of vaccines to the provinces. However, we are not dependent only on one vaccine. There are a number of vaccines, with more vaccines in final stages. Johnson & Johnson is actually in the final stages of Health Canada approval as well. And so, even though there are some supply difficulties with one vaccine or another, it depends upon the week. Just given the fact that we have Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, so many different brands of vaccines to be able to pick from, we still feel fairly confident that by the end of June that most Albertans are going to be able to at least have their first shot of vaccine. I know there are some specific groups that have already qualified to have a second vaccine, especially those that are immune compromised. But that being said, we can only do with what we can when it comes to the vaccines that are coming from the federal government. So we will roll with the punches, but I'm still optimistic that we're going to be able to hit those targets by the end of June.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Councillor Meyer. Go ahead.
Good evening, MLA Turton. How are you this evening?
I'm having a great time with my best community in my riding. Please don't tell Spruce Grove I said that.
I promise I won't. So I'll just kind of tell a story. A few months ago, I was discussing restrictions with a business owner, and they had recounted to me that basically they wouldn't be able to take another lockdown, and mostly it had to do with financial situations, of course. But it was also sort of the stress of not knowing, sort of that helpless position that it puts them in. And so my question is, well, first I'd like to say, so businesses need hope right now. They need hope right now. So with restrictions coming in last month and our numbers creeping up all last week, why were business supports delayed?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Meyer. So obviously, unfortunately, with COVID numbers and the trend lines that are going, we have always offered business supports, but spikes in COVID infection numbers and hospitalization numbers comes quickly, and it does take a little bit of time to release those business supports. Unfortunately, the infection numbers have to go up before additional supports can be offered, because we're very much dependent upon local variances when it comes to those types of numbers. So, but I believe it was only a couple days after the last set of restrictions that our government did release additional business supports. I realize that there's a number of businesses that are hurting. They're at their lines of credits are maxed out. Trust me, they're all contacting me looking for supports, and I know many of them were thankful that they were able to access those supports, increasing the speed at which we can release those financial supports to businesses in our area. Obviously, something I'm always interested in. How can we get the information out faster? And that's something I can definitely pass on to Minister Schweitzer that we have passed on. But I do realize is that from the correspondence I've been getting in my office is that many people have been very thankful that the business supports have been there. But obviously, I realize it can always come faster.
Okay, thank you. Move on to Councillor Laurie, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, MLA Turton, for your presentation here. I've two kind of comments and questions. The first is in regards to vaccines. So, first of all, I want to recognize that, obviously today I'm happy to hear the news that teachers are finally being made eligible for vaccinations. That's much too little too late, in my opinion. So I appreciate that it's finally been done, but that should have been as well. And the same is obviously first responders, all first responders finally being eligible last week. Again, when we look at the state of medical response across the province, it differs very whether you're in a large urban, a small urban, or a rural community. And many times, many of the first responders and who were being left off the block were responding to potential COVID patients without any assurance or protection of when they were going to be eligible for vaccines. But what I do want to talk about is second dose assurance. We know that Alberta has moved to the 4-month time frame on that. But what I'm hearing from many people who have received the vaccine is that they are not being provided with a follow-up appointment. And they're being told that essentially they aren't certain when their follow-up appointment will be whether it will or will not fall within that 4-month range. And when I hear you talking about the supply issues that Alberta is facing, obviously I'm very happy to hear we're still on track to have first vaccinations for residents up to I believe you said the end of June there. But what about second vaccinations? Are we looking at a potential risk of putting all of these first vaccinations, as you call them, jabs, into arms, but depleting the supply available to actually fully vaccinate and putting us at risk of potentially further waves into next fall and winter?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Councillor Laurie. So I guess a couple points. Obviously about the teachers, I'm very excited, obviously, to have teachers announced today that they can qualify for the vaccine, as well as first responders. As many people that pay attention to legislative proceedings know, this was a specific question that I asked Minister Shandro. I believe it was 2 weeks ago in the chamber, specifically about firefighters and teachers and when they can actually expect to get vaccines and have their specific sectors looked after. The question always comes up about why they didn't come up earlier. The advice from our top medical officials and Dr. Dina Hinshaw has always been to focus on the age categories that have the highest potential to suffer adverse health effects if they contact COVID-19. And so, and that is why our government has been very consistent with vaccinating those older individuals that if they did get COVID-19 would obviously have a higher risk of being hospitalized or put into the ICUs. I know that there are some people that would rather have, for example, a mid 20-year-old or early 20-year-old have access to the vaccine potentially before a 49-year-old or 52-year-old or 55-year-old. But I do believe, and talking with health officials, is that the approach that our government has taken in that regard has really allowed us to weather a little bit more of the storm in compared to jurisdictions like Ontario, which was very much more sector-based, but it also left a lot more people exposed that if they did contact COVID-19 would, have a higher risk of being hospitalized. And so because we went with an age approach predominantly with a sector focus next, it allowed Alberta to really, miss a lot of the adverse effects that would have went with the sector first approach. But regardless, I'm happy that teachers are included in the list. They do work in congested environments. I'm very, very thankful. Obviously, everyone watching this is aware that Memorial is, has all their kids learning at home now. For the next couple of weeks, and so obviously I'm excited to get teachers out, protected, but we have a long ways to go. The second question, I'm sorry, Councillor Laurie, I'm drawing a complete blank. Can you just refresh my memory what your second point of your question was?
Yeah, so the actual question revolved around the second dose assurance.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Okay, yeah, thanks. That reminded me. So in terms of the second dose, so I have absolutely no fear that residents are going to be able to get their second doses. Like in terms of the general population, some areas that are considered higher risk have already received second doses. As many people may or may not know, is that the first dose gives approximately a mid 60% protection rate of adverse health effects if they contract COVID-19, and the second dose increases that from mid 60s to approximately 92%. That is why almost every Western country and health system has advocated for a first dose as fast as possible, as Alberta is also following. However, we realize that there's some anxiety there about later on in the summer about where they're going to be in terms of vaccine supply. But just given that vaccine supplies worldwide are continuing to increase, and I don't see any issues with the available supply being available for residents that want it for their second dose.
Excellent. Your Worship, and if I may, with my second question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about the support systems that were in place for businesses. And again, I appreciate all that's been put out there for it. And you talked a little bit about time. One of the problems that's been brought to my attention by many businesses applying for the SME grants, the small and medium enterprise grants, is that they're applying for the grants, they're being approved for the grants, but then the payments aren't coming. and it takes a long time for the payments to actually be processed and this money to actually flow through to the businesses. And not only does it take a lot of time, but there's also no defined time. So the grant status application sits in approved. However, the business owner has no idea whether those funds are going to arrive in their bank account next week or next month. Can you provide some clarity to our businesses as to what the expected turnaround time is on that? And are you able to provide some feedback back to the programs so that when an approved status is obtained, it also provides an estimated payment date?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Laurie, for the question. So regarding the actual scenario that you're talking about, that is exact feedback that businesses have talked to me about, as well as chambers of commerce. As many of you may know, I serve as chair of the Capital Region Caucus, so I also have the privilege of working with chambers of commerce from all over the Greater Capital Region, and that is a concern that has come up, and that is something that I've passed on to Minister Schweitzer in terms of just streamlining that process. At this time, I don't have an update with what I can give, but I do realize that a lot of businesses are depending on this money, and the minister is as well, and we're obviously anxious to make this as streamlined of a process as possible.
Thank you very much, MLA Turton. Move on to Councillor Matties. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and welcome, MLA Turton. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic.
That is great. Okay, my question is with regards to the hospital utilization and the incidence in Alberta, which is at the highest level in Canada per 1,000, I believe it is, as well as in the United States. And my question then is twofold. First of all, the vaccine rollout to provinces. Exactly what is the process in which each province gets the vaccines? So, for example, is it by population? Is it a fair, equitable process? I've never heard exactly how we know what we're going to be getting relative to another province, and ensuring that, number one, we do get our first doses, as well as the assurance for the second doses for people. Can you give me some information with regards to how the provinces receive the vaccine doses from the federal government?
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Matty. So I believe it is actually assigned according to population. The federal government does keep it back a certain percentage. I will admit I've been told different amounts that the federal government keeps, to be able to take care of either federal employees or else be able to allocate to areas of greatest concern or hotspots across the country. I know that there was an expectation of some additional vaccines from the federal government, I believe last week, to be given out towards hotspots in Banff and Fort McMurray. So that is, from my understanding, that is how the vaccines are actually rolled out across the country.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a fact, or is that, so do we know that's a fact of how that's done, that there is an equitable and fair process and we know what that process is?
I can confirm for you the exact numbers, how it would be. I guess equitable is always interesting. Is it according to population? But from everything I've been told, it was according to population. But I can find out and request to the Minister of Health to get that exact information and have it sent to your office.
Thank you.
Thank you. Move on to Councillor Plechko, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and hello, MLA Turton. I won't ask you how you're doing because everybody seems to ask that question, but I do want to make a comment. I do hope that you and your family are doing very well through this, and you're able to spend a bit of time with them, as well as do your obligations as a MLA. My question is around small business. Many small businesses that I've talked to over the last little while, lots of them struggled prior to COVID. So they don't quite meet the programs that you've put out for COVID. And I'm wondering if this government is actually going to look at programs that help all businesses that have survived to this point be able to qualify. And it circles around staff. Lots of them didn't have staff prior to COVID. Some of them have been able to move their businesses forward and still struggle to be able to do that. And yet they don't qualify for any of the programs. So how can this government start to look at programs that will benefit all small businesses?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Councillor Palechko. So obviously, there are some businesses that have fallen through loopholes when it comes to the grant programs. As you can imagine, when a grant program is being rolled out on extremely short notice to be able to offer these supports for businesses, you know, it takes care of a wide swath of those businesses, but there's always loopholes and gaps where some of those businesses are. And then obviously we take care of the gaps and loopholes, and there always seems to be one or two left remaining. I know there was some examples of some businesses here in our riding that opened during the time of COVID, and so they couldn't show the prior revenue. And so we actually had the rules tweaked a little bit so that those businesses would then qualify. Also, same thing goes for businesses and restaurants that had patio setups, for example. There were some businesses that fell through the cracks in that. So we're currently working on that as well. We're trying everything in our power, obviously, to put forth these grants that can provide support to the greatest swath of our business community. We also know that the best thing that we can do to help our business community and our society as a whole is make sure that our COVID-19 infection numbers and hospitalization numbers are remain low, and that we can get back to a sense of normalcy, which I'm hoping will be this summer. So you have a great question there. If you have a specific business that you know, that you may come in contact with that has fallen through the cracks, please refer my contact information to them. I'd love to know their story so I can advocate on their behalf to the minister, because I'm pretty sure that if a single business comes to me that, you know, they have fallen through a gap in the system, there's probably another 100 more just like that. So we have to make sure that all businesses have access to that type of support so that they can be solvent and there and operational when we're all done here at done with COVID-19.
And if I can, Your Worship.
Go ahead.
Thank you, MLA Turton. Now I will pass along to the people that I've been talking to some of that information, and hopefully they get a hold of you. I do have one second question, and you made reference to 16A and no capital plans. Is there actually a scheduled maintenance so that we don't fall in the cracks that equate to a small fishing pond anymore?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was like a pun on words talking about cracks, because I know obviously I drive 16A quite a bit when I visit people and residents in Stony Plain. So as of right now, there's nothing in the capital plan in terms of major substantive work. You know, pothole patching from the Department of Transportation at this point is completed on a continuous basis, but is as needed. There's no, as of now, they're not doing a full-scale resurface or anything like that. It's just patchwork at this point. But it is something let's just say I talk to the staff there at the department, Mr. Botros, quite on a regular basis. He knows my voice clearly on the phone when I talk about issues there. But you're definitely not alone, Councillor Palechko, for that one road. That one highway gets a lot of traffic. And something I'm always bringing up to the minister as well as the bureaucratic heads in this area is that this isn't a road that's in the middle of nowhere, Alberta. I mean, you're talking about a very busy highway that goes right through, and I believe Stony Plain is the second largest town in the province on a main thoroughfare going into Edmonton. So it's important to make sure that that highway stays at a good standard, make sure that it's safe. But it's something I'm always on the phone about for sure. So.
Okay, thank you. Move on to Councillor Bennett, please.
Good evening, MLA Turton. You know, it's always better in Stony Plain, but the Meridian Housing Foundation actually serves residents in Spruce Grove, Stony Plain, and Parkland County. So I'm just wondering if you've heard that the Meridian Housing Foundation has purchased land in Spruce Grove for a lodge. We would certainly appreciate your support when it comes time to build that facility. And are you aware of the housing needs assessment that the Meridian Housing Foundation had commissioned through Collier's to justify why we need another lodge in this area?
I will admit, Councillor Bennett, I don't recall that individual report. I know I've seen reports about the need for long-term housing in this area, but not specifically the report that you're referencing that was commissioned by the Meridian Foundation. But I would love to see it if it is available.
I will send you a copy.
Perfect.
And did you know about the land purchased in Spruce Grove?
I was unaware of that specific land project that you're talking about.
Well, now you know. I've just announced it to you.
Okay, well, maybe perhaps Councillor Bennett, if possible, I'd love to be able to come out and hang out with you for a board meeting at the Meridian Foundation. So you guys have done such fantastic work, and so you know, and especially in the virtual format, I would love to be able to attend a next board meeting if possible.
I will get that invitation out to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bennett and MLA Turton. Any other questions or comments for our MLA? Okay, while we're waiting, just a quick question regarding 16A. I think you mentioned that it is going to be surface patching only when required. In the past, our previous MLAs have advocated for a mill and pave of 628, which happened a couple years ago, and again the upgrading and widen of 779. You mentioned that you drive down 16A quite often to see your residents and to see your constituents. You can obviously tell that that road definitely does not meet the standards of any kind of provincial highway ever. Is there any possibility of getting us on a budget item for a mill and pave?
I can always advocate for it with Minister McIver. You're specifically talking about 16A, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. No. Absolutely. I don't mind being very squeaky with the minister. I know I obviously talk with Mr. McIver quite a bit. He's a very busy gentleman these days, managing 2 departments with municipal affairs and transportation. But I could easily advocate on for that specific project. I know enough residents have talked about it, and it's you know, been something I was going to mention on my regular meetings that I have with them. But I can definitely mention that to the minister.
Okay, that sounds great. And if you want to know where the money comes from, I can actually show you based on the budget that I've read through the provincial government. Maybe that's the next question I'll kind of follow up there before I go to another councillor's question is, in the last provincial budget, kind of oil prices were pegged at $45 for this year. Currently, oil prices, the WTI is sitting at $65, which is a 44% increase from what the provincial government used to calculate their budget. Let's assume that it stays roughly above $45. There should be a huge surplus. Right? So in terms of that, what is the modeling for the provincial government? Are you seeing that it's going to stay above 45, or do you see it's going to drop below 45, and that's why you guys use $45 as a reference point? Because that's considerably lower than what the current price is and what the other kind of business magazines I'm reading, that it doesn't seem like it will go below 50.
Well, yeah, thank you, Mayor Choi. Our, you know, the way we predict oil prices, you know, is obviously based upon top-level financial expertise in the province. You know, our stance of our government has always been to be on the conservative nature. You know, Minister Taze has been quoted frequently as saying he doesn't want to forecast our way out of a deficit. It'd be very easy to say, oh yeah, it's going to be at X amount of dollars, and then all of a sudden, you know, have the floor fall out from under you. It should be noted that it was only 13 months ago we had the largest catastrophic oil drop in our province's history that happened when the Russians and the Saudis were going back and forth in an oil crisis, and in essence caused one of the biggest financial crises that our province has ever faced. And so while you know, I agree it's conservative, I think that is a prudent approach We still have a very large deficit. We have a lot of large expenses, especially that are COVID related, that we have to be able to take care of. I understand people would love for us to open up the taps, but as stated in the budget that we just passed, I believe it was 2 months ago or a month and a half ago, we're not experiencing boom times any way, stretch, or form here in the province, and so. We will continue to use those funds prudently. I know that municipalities are one stakeholder that we deal with amongst many that would love to have us be able to invest more in communities. It's obviously a big part of my background that I would love to support. But at this point, especially since we are still coming from such a horrible oil crash of last year, I do think it is prudent to be on the conservative nature when it comes to our predictions, when it comes to oil prices.
Thank you. Moving to Councillor Mattis, do you have another question or comment?
Sorry. Yes, I do. Sorry, I couldn't get my finger working properly. Yes, my question is basically I was on the the Edmonton Chamber call today with the Honorable Aaron O'Toole speaking, and he talked about the biggest failure of the federal government or the Liberal government was their ineffective vaccine rollout. And my question is, and I'm wondering if you happen to know, there was a talk about having a vaccine facility built in Quebec. And I was wondering if you know if this is still planned and if you have any information as to when that potentially would be operating to support the needs of our country, if you might know anything about that.
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Councillor Mattis. So obviously it's a little bit outside of my purview, but it is a question that comes up, so I could probably answer it as well. So the question always comes up about why is it that as a country we don't have our own domestic vaccine production supply like other countries? And the fact of the matter is that over multiple federal governments, both conservative, liberal, and off and on, have put in place policies and regulations that have really allowed generic drug companies to be able to produce drugs here in Canada at a much cheaper rate. Obviously, Canadians benefited by getting access to generic drugs much quicker here than they would in other jurisdictions. The downside of this, and as elected officials, you know that there's always a downside, but the downside is that a lot of the patent protections that were put in place for a lot of those companies to do R&D to develop these vaccines in the first place disappeared, and it became a disincentive for a lot of those companies to be able to do R&D here in Canada because a lot of their intellectual information was they weren't able to reap the benefits of their own patents, and so while Canadians for many years were able to enjoy generic drugs at a much cheaper cost, and unfortunately it just allowed the exodus of these large pharmaceutical companies to leave, along with the R&D that went with them. Unfortunately, when COVID-19 hit, we did not really have a set domestic pharmaceutical supply developed here in the country because it was disincentivized to even be here. And so I know there are opportunities like in Quebec, you mentioned the one example, Councillor Mattis, but as well, there are some companies I believe in Winnipeg, as well as in Calgary and Edmonton, that are looking at becoming, again, we're starting almost from scratch to develop a homegrown pharmaceutical industry. The downside is that a lot of those products are still a couple of years away from being able to develop anything. So while it won't necessarily look after us for the COVID-19 pandemic, my goal, or I guess expectation and hope really at this point, is that those entities are still around in a couple of years' time, that there's federal policies put in place that will incentivize those companies to remain here, protect them from protect their intellectual property, and allow Canada to be better suited to protect itself from the next pandemic, whenever that comes. But I think everyone on this call wishes it comes in many, many years when none of us are in elected office anymore.
Yeah, actually, I heard that just recently one of the pharmaceutical companies in Canada is leaving. I think it's Providence. And that's just some news that I've heard recently. My next question, Mayor Choi, would I be able to ask one more?
Go ahead.
Thank you. My question is with regards to the provincial budget. That's another thing in terms of, I know that there is a plan to get back to a balanced budget at some point. And with the plan that we're looking at, hopefully getting back to some level of normalcy by the summer, so maybe by the fall. Can you just give me an idea of what the plan is for the provincial government based on, where we see we're at right now?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question, Councillor Maddie. So I know at the start of our provincial term in 2019, we were talking about getting back to a balanced budget position by 2023. I believe the next election was, and we were seeing some amazing signs of economic recovery, especially in that first 10 months after we were elected. But obviously the energy crash, which I referenced earlier, between the Saudis and the Russians, have severely affected our budget and our bottom line, as well as COVID-19, just causing a worldwide stagflation and just kind of stopping any kind of economic activity. Really, I think hampered those goals, I think, to get to a balanced budget position. We do want to have a roadmap clearly identified. I think Minister Tays has talked about that. But from my conversations and just the economic realities of the province, I don't believe that we will be in a balanced budget position by 2023. However, I do know that many economic predictions have shown that Alberta is to lead the country in economic growth. There's a lot of pent-up supply for construction and energy, not just across Canada, but across the world. And Alberta is well suited to be able to provide the goods and products needed for that economic recovery. And so I think many of the predictions that I've looked at from major banks have shown that Alberta is going to be doing quite well in the second half of 2021 and 2022. And obviously we're going to have to manage that growth, but we have a large hole to get out of as with COVID-19 and with low energy prices last year. But I am fairly optimistic for the future in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I do not see any more hands up. So I'll just ask another question. I think in terms of Alberta's economy, and I think you mentioned the Minister of Jobs, Economy, Innovation, Minister Schweitzer. Can you give us a report on how that's going in terms of diversification and building more capacity, jobs, and building our economy that's more diversified instead of just focused on two of the biggest sectors that we've had over the last 50 years?
Yes, fantastic question, Mayor Choi. And I know if anyone has watched my Facebook, lately I've been showing off a number of our amazing wins that we've had, especially in the IT sector. Calgary is really being known as a hub for new IT development, and IT companies from all over North America have actually been moving, creating a number of high-paying jobs to fill our downtown core. In Calgary, as many of you may or may not know, the vacancy rate is quite low, and it creates an economic advantage from Calgary compared to other jurisdictions when you're looking at low lease space, highly trained workforce. And so we've had a number of large IT wins, which some additional wins coming later on. So Calgary is really turning into a success story in terms of economic diversification in our IT sector that's growing there. As well as that a lot of people may not know is that Alberta is actually going through a renewable energy boom because of the changes that we made in our electricity market with supply and market side of the equation, is that many areas in southern Alberta are experiencing incredible growth when it comes to renewable energy, both for wind as well as for solar, really creating that energy diversification that we need. As you know, the transition to coal is almost complete, if not completely complete. So now many of our coal-fired power plants are converted over to natural gas. And as well as ongoing work in the oil sands. So again, Alberta has always been in a great position to be able to supply energy for the world. And just given the fact that the world has a lot of pent-up demand, many areas of the world have been shut right down because of COVID-19. We're all kind of coming out of it at the same time. time, and that's going to be looking very well for Alberta's prospects over the next 14, 15 months.
Right. Okay, with that, thank you very much for your time, Emily Turton, and definitely appreciate the work that you're doing on our behalf to advocate for some of the regional initiatives and some of the initiatives that Stony Plain relies on, so that we can actually build a better and more diverse economy in Stony Plain as well.
Perfect. Excellent. And thank you so much, Stony Plain Council, for allowing me to come on out. And as much as I love seeing you in this format, I'd always love to see you guys in person as well. But I realize we only have a couple more weeks, hopefully, to get past COVID-19. And as always, it's one of the greatest privileges of my life to be able to represent Stony Plain in the legislature. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Okay. Thanks. Take care. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you, members of council. We'll move on to number 5 of our agenda, which is business items. 5.1 is the fiscal sustainability framework. Go ahead, town manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe at this time I will just be turning this over to our General Manager of Corporate Services and her team to speak with you about.
Thank you, Town Manager. To Your Worship and all of Council, as indicated, we're here tonight to talk further about the fiscal sustainability, specifically the service levels and asset management strategies. You've likely heard about both of these topics, as they're both quite hot topics across the municipal sector. So starting with service levels, it's an important area to continue advancing within the town. Due to the financial pressures faced to deliver the same or more services with less dollars, this is often a discussion within the departments as to what level of service we provide to the public, and is adjustment up or down required. This is critical to ensuring levels are sustainable and maintainable into the future. Part of this is evaluating how the services are provided, and are there more efficient ways of delivering internally, or maybe changing the model of delivery to a contract. Administration had begun documenting service levels, so an organizational view of all services provided was held to help us make recommendations to Council. This work continued in the tri-municipal servicing strategy as part of the regional plan work. As this regional work finalizes, the service levels will need to be continued to be maintained and advanced into the future. Some service levels have been documented in policy already, such as the snow removal and ice control, which sets the expectation for the public as well as protects the municipality from liability. While not easy, the services and levels are important to ensure priorities and strategies are achieved, while adding new services for the town in a difficult economic time. It is important to keep these principles and questions top of mind to balance the need for new service with the ability of residents to pay for the existing services. And within your package, you'll see sort of the questions and the strategy that will form part of the overall strategy moving forward. Moving on to the second strategy tonight, which is tied to service levels, are the assets used to deliver the services and the management of these assets. The town continues to advance its knowledge of its assets, future requirements to maintain and replace these assets, and condition assessment and life cycle planning. As Council has seen, administration has been further advancing asset management capacity within the organization. This has involved policy setting with Council, the formation of an asset management committee and plan, and recently in 2021, we have begun working on improving our long-term capital planning by implementing a capital project charter. These charters are key to understanding those asset requirements, so the infrastructure gap can be understood and funding can be planned and staged to match those requirements. This will allow the public and Council to understand the future needs, so Council as the decision makers can allocate resources efficiently and sustainably, which also ties into some of the reserve strategy and policy work planned as part of the overall strategy. As this is better understood, it is likely the prioritization of these costs around infrastructure will need to be better defined. This interconnectedness is why I love the fiscal sustainability framework, as all the strategies are connected, and the graphic you see in front of you shows that. A timely example for me that was coming to my brain today was the new transit service that's just started. So the buses of this service were funded by grants, which is the capital funding strategy you can see, as well as some of the initial operating costs were funded this way. The work was planned for in the department plans and budgets, which is another internal strategy you see in front of you in the framework. The service level will need to be reviewed after a year or so of transit running within the community to understand the actual costs and the demand for this service from residents. And that's the service level strategy we're discussing tonight. Finally, the buses will need to be maintained and future reserves established for the planned replacement. So when the bus is at its end of life or nearing its end of life, there's dollars there to replace. And that's part of the second strategy we're talking tonight, the asset management strategy. So asset management is challenging but important to the community, as if you think of the history of Canada, there's been 100+ years of infrastructure that's been built without a strong plan to track, maintain, and replace it into the future. That's now changing across communities, and that's why you're hearing so much about asset management. By understanding the cost to maintain the assets now and into the future will allow for a more fiscally sustainable picture for the town. This will allow council to understand the balancing act between maintaining the existing assets with investing in new assets that the community demands. A couple of examples that came to mind when I reviewed the strategies were the flexibility question, which was on page 18 of your asset management strategy within the council's agenda. And it stated what funding sources are available for asset management and what impact would there be on the town if they are utilized. So a town example of this would be the impact of the large storm upgrades required and the impact on the debt capacity. So as the storm rate is new, debt will need to be borrowed to fund some of these future projects, which will limit the debt capacity for other projects. The better information we have around the assets and conditions, the better financing plans can be built, and the town can prioritize where the funding is allocated. As you know, our borrowing limit is legislated. Further, the town's vulnerability, which was another area identified, another key principle within the asset management strategy, has increased recently around the management of assets, especially the roads program. So in the past, this has been funded by our MSI grant from the province, which they have recently signaled will have a 25% reduction coming. As you heard the MLA talk, there's still continued economic uncertainty for the province, and the town will need to either slow down some of the maintenance or replacement or reprioritize other funding to these roads to minimize that vulnerability. So understanding that vulnerability helps us plan strategically where the dollars should be allocated. Asset management is an ongoing process. However, I'm proud that the organization is making strides to more formally document the management of these assets so they are well taken care of for generations to come. With that, I trust that these principles will continue to move the town forward in discussing the relatedness of all the fiscal strategies, and the questions framed within the document are timely as we head into corporate planning in November, where tough decisions are made. That concludes my presentation tonight, and I can answer any questions council may have as we continue to work through the fiscal sustainability strategies.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation, and definitely on behalf of council, we appreciate the work that's gone into creating this financial sustainable strategy so that we as a community have a better understanding of how we're going to get to the places where we want to go and see us achieve in terms of the community. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding on the presentation on service levels and asset management? Going to Councillor Mannies, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for the good presentation this evening. My question, and I'm going to try and frame it as best that I can, but I'm trying to understand the bigger picture of this, and we could use an example of transit or transportation in general. And so our current state where we are at, where a lot of people drive, few people use the bus, the costs are manageable in our society to a society where costs become increasingly more difficult for people to maintain certain types of lifestyle standards, etc. And also new changes with regards to electricity and other forms of transportation, etc., are coming into our path. So my question is, with regards to current state, a desired future state, how do we marry in terms of first of all, vision as to where we might be going with the future and what our future needs are with that, but also some of the realities of what's happening around us in terms of, and then also the measurement part of that, of how are we measuring success of our strategy or of our program. So big question, I know, but starting with in terms of the current state that we're in, looking at the vision for the future, how do we incorporate that into it? And you can use the transit for an example, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Matthews.
Thanks, Councillor Matthews. It is a big question, but it's a good one and it's an important one. You know, I think none of us have the answers, but part of this fiscal framework that I like is, sorry, my children are yelling in the background and distracted me. Part of why I like this strategy is that it opens up this discussion, and I think it helps us build the corporate plan and how that piece fits into being fiscally sustainable and talking about that piece. I think there is a lot of changing realities, and so how do we continue to understand those and adjust? That's why I like the interrelatedness of this as well, because as you change one thing, so, you know, transit was top of mind because we're adding it. So what does that mean to the rest of the services? Does it continue? Do they need to continue to advance, or does it continue to change them? Because there is that opportunity. And, you know, measurement was the other sort of, I was keeping a few notes as you were asking questions, is also a good thought and a good topic as we continue to move forward with the strategies. How do we measure that to make sure that we're achieving what we want to? So I think some of it ties into the strategic plan and ensuring that we're moving things forward, but in a sustainable manner. And I think that as right now, I find it a little bit difficult because the economy is so uncertain. So as, you know, we just heard vaccines, and as some of that stabilizes and more certainty comes, hopefully some of this becomes easier into the future as well. But yeah, great question. It definitely is a bigger picture question. And I think that's important that Council keeps their eyes out, you know, far into the future, so that we're planning for those things and ensuring sustainability.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Councillor Matthews?
Well, if I may just make one follow-up comment. I was on a course today with regards to future focused leadership, and you know, we talk about what the future is in terms of and then how do we ensure that our citizens on a grassroots basis are getting involved in actually telling us what specifically their needs are, their vision is for the community. And I'm just going to give an example. If and this was an example that was used at this course today, was with regards to recreation facility or complex. And what we have traditionally done in the past is certainly we do engagement with the public, and then we'll come up with a few different plans that maybe make sense with that, and then we kind of ask people, do we like plan A, plan B, what are your thoughts about it, get a little bit more feedback. But as opposed to taking at a grassroots basis the citizens of our community and maybe stakeholders, citizens of the community, where they come up with what is it specifically they envision for something, and whether that is you know, in the future of transit or transportation in the community. And I know we've had lots of engagement and things like that too, but sometimes we kind of come up with an idea, but as opposed to maybe letting a grassroots group do that. And that's the other part, is I was going to ask, in terms of when we look at overall fiscal sustainability strategies, are we ensuring that we have I guess the process in place where we ensure a different type of engagement that really, starts with the people. And we've talked about that a little bit, and just wondering what your thoughts are on that with regards to how that fits in here.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Matthews.
To Councillor Matties and all of Council, it's always a challenging topic with engagement, but I do think it's important, as I know you do as well. The one that always comes to my mind, and sometimes it's easier said than done, although I think certain areas within the town have done a good job on it, is how do you get some of the services or programs back to those grassroots? Or is there different ways to deliver through the not-for-profits, and thinking through if some of those options are possible? Because typically they can deliver them at lower cost than the town. You may lose some control that you're used to having, but they will usually do it at a lower cost, and they maybe are closer to the grassroots or the just local community. So it's a good idea, or a good thing to keep our finger on and challenge ourselves of, is there different programs or different services that we could deliver that way? Because I think there's two wins to that thought. So those are some of my quick thoughts, but it's definitely something for us to continue to think about into the future.
Mayor Choi, can I just say one more comment?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the reason I had brought up recreation is, for example, at Banff, they have a recreation facility, the Fenland Recreation Facility, and they just lost their group, the hockey group at the arena, and so now they have an underused facility, and they're going back to a grassroots basis where they are asking everybody, everyone, people that are not users, what is the vision and what would they like to see for this facility? And really taking it another level of, like, the people are going to create what that's going to be. So maybe instead of it's a recreation facility with curling and hockey, or maybe it's hockey in the summertime. Maybe it is some cultural programming. Just it's whatever the people are wanting. And so I wanted to suggest that we as we go forward, that we need to be able to take a look at what our assets are, but really getting to a level of another component in here that really talks about the people and the people directing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matties. Any other members of council for questions of clarity and understanding? Okay. I see none. Just want to thank administration for the work that they're doing regarding this file. Having a strategy will create the backbone for our continued growth and our evolution and development as a community. As mentioned by the general manager, many municipalities in the past would just build things and not create a proper fiscal framework to replace them, to service them. So that has always been an issue that has been arising now as communities get older. There was no money put aside to kind of finance and refurbish and replace some of the existing infrastructure that we have. And it's good that Town of Stony Plain is looking at a framework to help us build the proper backbones for our community to springboard forward. I do like the fact that administration mentioned the fact of reviewing the service levels. Definitely, in the past, we've always been trying to do everything in-house, believing that it is also cheaper and more affordable. And sometimes that is not the case. Sometimes maybe the most cost-effective and the best use and the best service level is to contract it up to a private third party. So I'm glad that our staff are going to be looking at those things as well, and part of this whole fiscal sustainability framework to see where we can set the Town of Stony Plain into a better position. Okay, with that, Councillor Matty, since you've been on the mic, I'm just asking you to make the motion to accept for information, please.
That Town Council accept the service levels and asset management fiscal sustainability strategies for information.
Thank you very much, Councillor Matties. Members of council, any questions or concerns regarding that motion to accept for information? Okay, seeing none and hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, please.
Mr. Mayor, there's 7 hands in favor.
Thank you very much. Move on to 5.2 of our agenda, and this is an update regarding the emergency management update. Members of council, I believe we're joined by our DEM, or disaster management somebody. I think that's an association or something. What does that stand for again, manager or DEM?
Director of Emergency Management.
That's what it is. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And we're joined. So go ahead. I believe it's the fire chief.
Your worship, I will just ask our general manager of Community and Protective Services, him and his team that's available to make a presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. So yes, this evening, myself and Dem is correct, Director of Emergency Management, and also the deputy, which is Trevor Mistel, the fire chief. So in an emergency, we don't usually keep our current roles. We have a separate role under emergency management. And then when the emergency is over, we revert back to our original roles from a municipal perspective. So this evening, we're here to provide you with an update as to what happened in 2020 and some of the things that we're working on in 2021. As council, through the bylaw, is part of the entire emergency management process for the town of Stony Plain. And you are our advisory committee. And once a year, we do provide you with an update as to the activities that were conducted the previous year and what we plan to do in 2021. So a quick summary presentation of the report that was presented, and certainly myself and Mr. Mistel, fire chief, and Deputy Dem are here to answer any questions that you might have. So just a quick overview related to emergency management in the province of Alberta. So it is the oversight is provided by the government of Alberta. Municipal Affairs is the ministry, and Alberta Emergency Management Agency is within the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, and they look and govern and provide guidance and mentorship around all of the emergency management activities that happen in Alberta. There is some provincial legislation that we do follow. So there's the Emergency Management Act, which has through the COVID-19 pandemic response, has had a couple of updates just to provide longer clarity around state of local emergencies, and also enforcement has been added to the Act. Local authority emergency management regulations, so that's primarily what we follow related to what we will do as a community and are required to do from the provincial perspective related to emergency management. Then at the local level, we do have our plan that we have developed and has been around for a number of years. We also have our emergency management bylaw, which council has seen, and we updated recently with the addition of the local authority emergency management regulation. Administration is part of the Central Region Emergency Preparedness Partnership, as is the town of Stony Plain. And just a quick update or background on that is the Central Region Emergency Preparedness Partnership is 24 communities in the Edmonton region that have signed a memorandum of agreement. If an emergency happens in our central region, we would all be committed to providing resources to the affected communities. And we would be doing that typically with, sometimes not with a charge. We would provide staffing or equipment if able to. And basically it's our region responding to an emergency as a partnership with each other. We haven't yet had to do that. Some of the things that have happened in the province, wildfires in Slave Lake, Wood Buffalo, and floods in southern Alberta. Certainly the CREP group got together and sent representatives from our region down and resources down and up to the jurisdictions that were impacted by some of those emergencies. And that group does meet quarterly throughout the year, and through the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been meeting bi-weekly to ensure that some of the measures and how we're responding to the measures are certainly aligned with each other, or we certainly understand how each of us are interpreting or applying the measures in our own communities. And we do have mutual aid agreements with City of Spruce Grove and others related to equipment and response if we need. So if something happens in our community that is stretching our resources, certainly we do call on our partners in Spruce Grove and also Parkland County. And likewise, if we do have, City of Spruce Grove has called us in from time to time to assist and back them up when they've had large response need. Primarily, that's been on the fire side. As council is aware, we did have a partnership with the 3 communities related to ladder trucks, and we each contributed a third each to each of those ladder trucks that were purchased by Spruce Grove, Stony Plain, and Parkland County. And certainly those pieces of equipment do go to each other's communities when required. So the emergency management plan that we currently have, it is reviewed annually by Alberta Emergency Management Agency. Each year, they're very impressed with the document, and this year they did come in and review the document, and there was an successful audit of that document. After reviewing the document, they reached out and asked if we would share it with other communities, as it's been used as a template for communities that are developing the plan. So they do appreciate our plan, the ease of our plan, and the inclusions of our plan related to the detail in it. And a lot of work is done to update on that on an annual basis. The emergency management plan does provide a guide for our municipal response to an emergency that may happen in the community. So it's not necessarily a game plan for our citizens, it's a game plan for ourselves with respect to responding to emergency. So it outlines positions, responsibilities, who should be called, when they should be called, state of local emergency, where we set the emergency operations center up, the role of council, and various positions throughout the plan. Just highlighting a few of the quick things that happened in 2020. As we're all aware, COVID-19 really was the theme in 2020 related to emergency management, and it also continues in 2021. We did have a partial activation of our emergency operations center. We activated 2 positions and then brought in a third position to take care of our personal protective equipment in terms of bringing sanitizer, masks, and those such of things that were procured by the provincial government. So we definitely did activate myself and Trevor in the initial stages of the COVID-19 response, and SLT played a large role in that decision-making and moving things forward around May 2020 and continues to do that today. Once the COVID-19 pandemic did hit and we were starting to be more responsible for our local update, or sorry, our local response, we were providing daily updates to staff between the months of March and July. So 7 days a week, updates went out to staff related to COVID-19, the measures that were changing, the restrictions that were being put in place, the numbers and the regional numbers, and the impacts of COVID-19 on our community and our organization. Those updates continue as required. We don't do them daily, but certainly when there are large announcements or impactful announcements, we definitely do put more information out to our staff. And certainly I think we've also provided the same correspondence and updates to council. We do continue to attend weekly and bi-weekly meetings with Government of Alberta and other stakeholders related to COVID-19 and the things that are happening related to COVID-19. Fortunately, we are invited to meetings with Alberta Health Services, and with Dr. Hinshaw herself. We did develop a temporary face covering bylaw in 2020, and that continues today to be active. Emergency management training was continued last year with our staff, our internal staff. So we do have the opportunity to do virtual training to some of the courses that are required in emergency management. So fortunate for us, we continue to do that as able and as staff had the time to complete. We certainly have continued our meetings as stated with GOA, Alberta Health Services, and CREP. And we did develop a COVID-19 relaunch plan for staff returning from work from home back into the office. We did implement that relaunch plan in September of 2020. And in November 2020, we were mandated to go back to work from home as part of the measures related to the numbers increasing in Alberta related to COVID-19. That plan is a very good plan, and our expectation is once we're permitted to move back into the office, that plan will be brought out and continue to be used in the second wave of returning back to the office. We do anticipate, based on the update from MLA Turton today related to COVID vaccinations and the potential of a higher percentage of the population having their first shot by that midsummer timeframe, and then moving into the second shots in the fall, we do anticipate that some normal work opportunities will start to present themselves in September. 2021 emergency management activities. So the things that we're working on for the balance of the year, continue to assist staff with their ICS 100 and basic emergency management courses. So we are looking at who still needs to get that education and scheduling those courses. We continue to look at our plan on an annual basis to make sure that it's updated, and things that could be changed, refined, or improved certainly are looked at on an annual basis. We have scheduled, as part of the new council orientation, emergency management training for council in December. We look to complete 2 tabletop exercises with the Emergency Management Agency, which is essentially the staff that are listed in the plan as the section chiefs, which are the people that would be responsible for some of the areas captured within the planning, including communications, logistics, planning, those types of sections. So we will do 2 tabletops with that group, and we'll continue doing our bi-weekly meetings with GOA and EM partners, emergency management partners, as required related to COVID-19. So this week is Emergency Preparedness Week in Alberta and across Canada. I think the last 2 emergency preparedness weeks have taken a bit of a lighter tone, just given the COVID-19 pandemic. We typically do an in-person event at Heritage Park, and it was well attended the 2 years that we did provide that emergency preparedness activity. So we have taken a little bit of a backseat with COVID-19 related to that. It was certainly gaining some increased opportunity for our community to be involved in emergency preparedness, and we were gaining some great momentum with those 2 events, those 2 annual events. So we do look to get back to that annual event in 2022 as the measures permit or as we're able to. But what can residents do related to emergency preparedness? The biggest thing is developing and building their own 72-hour kit. Reason why that's the biggest component in emergency management for residents to focus on is usually in an emergency, the first 72 hours is fast and furious, and help is stretched very thin. So residents being able to protect themselves and their family, and fend for themselves, and be able to provide water, food, and stay well informed is something that certainly helps those that are responding to the emergency the ability to focus on the emergency itself versus responding to the people that need increased needs. So certainly that is the biggest thing that Emergency Preparedness Week will focus on is development and building of a 72-hour kit, and also doing a emergency response plan for your own home. So if something was to happen to you, or an emergency was to strike our community, what emergency plan do you have with your family? How do you communicate with your kids and contact your kids to get them back home if they're not at home? How do you escape your home? What exits do you use? What equipment do you have to potentially get your family from a second level down to the ground floor, or out of your basement into the backyard? And where do you meet if you're not all in the same residence? So those are the types of things that certainly are part of an emergency preparedness for an individual or a homeowner. The second thing that is fairly important is people putting Alberta Emergency Alert app on their phones, or and they both come in all formats, all phone formats. An example, and I think everyone would have received that had the emergency app on their phone. On Friday, the provincial government did put out a notification about the pandemic on Friday. So these emergency alerts also go over radio and also go over TV. Often, if there's an Amber Alert, that's another time that these are often put out to the community. So not only in emergencies, but when an event happens that requires a large broadcast across the province, the Alberta Emergency Alert is activated and utilized. So important to put it on a phone, and it's improving, and it's starting to become more like the United States, where it doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in, the alert will hit your phone if you happen to be in that area, versus sometimes it would only go to the localized area once you have the app on your phone. So Alberta continues to improve that tool. Mr. Mayor, that's a quick summary of our emergency management presentation and where we've been and where we're going in 2021. Happy to have questions, and again, Trevor, the Deputy Dem and Fire Chief, is here to answer any questions also.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, and that was very informative, and definitely a lot has happened over the last year, and we definitely appreciate the update. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Councillor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks to the GM for the great presentation. Just a quick question. You mentioned about our face mask bylaw that was put in by the town of Stony Plain. Obviously, since that point in time, one has been put in place from the province, who is ultimately responsible for the health orders in the province here. Municipal government, typically we don't get involved. I'm just wondering if you can remind us when the expiration date or the review date of that bylaw was. I know we discussed a little while back about potentially removing the bylaw. However, we did not want to create confusion in the municipality by removing our bylaw while the provincial one is still in place. But I'm just curious as to how long our current bylaw is set to run for.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie, our current bylaw states that when the government of Alberta or Alberta Health Services removes a watch status from the town of Stony Plain, then that would drop our bylaw. Also, our bylaw is rescinded when the COVID-19 health measures are rescinded by the government of Alberta.
So for clarity then, if the government of Alberta were to remove the mask mandate, as they're talking about potentially later this summer, would that automatically repeal our mask bylaw then as well?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie, because of the language that was included in our bylaw, we would probably seek some clarification from the government of Alberta, but certainly the interpretation would be if we were not under any mandated measures or special measures as a community, which when the bylaw was drafted and created, the term watch was utilized. That would certainly invoke a rescinding of our bylaw.
Thank you. And I understand, and I just want to provide some clarity on that. When you speak of the watch, that is just for when face masks become mandatory. The bylaw still exists even if we are not under a watch, correct?
Just for Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie. So just for clarity, when you're talking about, you're talking specifically about our bylaw.
Yes. So my understanding, and just for clarity on our bylaw, is that our bylaw exists with a clause in it that essentially puts the bylaw in force when we reach the watch status. And if we're out of the watch status for, I think it's a period of 14 days, the mandatory masking is rescinded. However, the bylaw itself still remains in force. Therefore, if we were to return to a watch category, the masks again would become mandatory. Now, this is under our bylaw. So I guess I'm looking for that differential clarity of when does our bylaw physically cease to exist?
Your Worship, it's a town manager, and I can probably provide a bit of comment there. So I believe the bylaw in question, so the face covering bylaw, I forget the official name on it though. I believe there's a clause in there that speaks to the bylaws automatically repealed when provincial COVID-19 public health orders are rescinded. So there's no sunset date specifically, but the wording is about the COVID-19 public health order. So I believe if the province were to rescind their orders, walk them back, whatever, however that would actually look, the bylaw would become inactive.
Right. So that's part of what I recall too from our discussions and debates, as we are not the experts and we rely on Alberta Health Services and the knowledge that they have that through talking to other provinces and the federal government, that if Alberta Health Services does not deem that this is no longer a health issue, then our bylaw is automatically rescinded, so we don't have to worry about it. It was done that way so that council had the flexibility to say, you know what, we do not know all the information. We're leaving that in the hands of Alberta Health Services. If that ever becomes, they said, you know what, the pandemic is over, it doesn't even have to come back to council, it's automatically rescinded. So we don't have to come to council. We would expect just a brief update from our staff just saying it has been rescinded because of this, and that's probably what we need. Councillor, anything else in terms of clarity on that?
So, Your Worship, that's exactly the point of clarity that I'm trying to understand and get to on this. So if our bylaw states that it's only rescinded once the pandemic is declared over by Alberta Health Services, the point of clarity that I'm looking for is the provincial government has indicated their desire to remove masking at some point in time within the next several months. They believe that is possible. But they did not state that that would be at the end of what they declare the provincial health emergency or the pandemic. So our bylaw speaks to our masking bylaw is only removed once the pandemic ends. So exactly as you stated, we're not the professionals. Alberta Health Services and the provincial government with their mandate of health are the professionals. So if they were to remove the provincial masking mandate prior to calling the pandemic over or removing their provincial health orders in entirely, will our bylaw automatically be rescinded, or will it at least be brought back to council at that point in time for a decision, rather than being left in place until such a time as the province removes all health orders and officially declares the pandemic over?
Okay, that's something that council can definitely have a conversation on. Our mandatory mask bylaw is also contingent on what we call a watch list, which the government has not used since the beginning of the pandemic after a few months of that. So if at some point the provincial government decides to rescind their mandatory mask bylaw, that is something that council can look at. Because if there is no watch list to be placed on, then our mask bylaw does not get kicked in either. To the general manager.
Your Worship, just for clarity, Councillor Laurie is correct in the fact that our bylaw could be rescinded. Our bylaw could be rescinded and still be in an active bylaw because the COVID-19 public health orders continue to be active in our province. If the provincial and as the CAO and yourself have stated, if the health orders are rescinded from the provincial government related to COVID-19, then this bylaw automatically is repealed from our legislated list. And I would suggest that if that was to happen and we believe that we should have a mask bylaw still in place, then administration would come forward with recommendations, and council likely would have to make some decisions on reenacting the bylaw, not rescinding the bylaw, or some other metrics of decision that would have to be presented and debated in order to achieve what we're looking to achieve with respect to continuing with some form of mask bylaw if we needed to. Right now, as it states, the watch was 50 per 100,000. And certainly we're all aware that the numbers of 50 per 100,000 have not been in effect for many months. So definitely the reasons why we were put under a watch certainly still are in effect in many jurisdictions in Alberta. And by virtues of their definition of a watch when it was first implemented to this town of Stony Plain, they still exist today. So definitely is something that we'll continue to chat with council and bring updates to you should we need to related to face coverings. But at this moment, certainly it's an enforceable bylaw, one that our peace officers have the ability to enforce, and certainly still remains in order and will for some time and we'll see what happens in the fall with respect to provincial COVID-19 public health orders.
Okay, thank you. So again, then good questions, Councillor. So if things do change, administration will bring this topic back to council to discuss. Councillor Matties, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is with regards to what can residents do? First of all, I really like the whole idea of the emergency kits, and I like the fact that we're educating people, etc. But I'm worrying about a fairly significant portion of our population that possibly couldn't afford to do something like that in terms of battery-operated flashlight and battery-operated radio and first aid kits and those types of things. And also with regards to the education of our broader community with regards to these types of things, like, for example, exiting a household and stuff, something that I don't really even have a plan to do either. So I'm wondering if we could get a little bit more information as to how this would work for our community, and some suggestions for additional education on that.
Okay, thank you. That's a good comment for our general manager or even our fire chief.
Certainly, Your Worship, through to Councillor Matthews. Definitely the link that was included in the report and on the Town of Stony Plain webpage. We do have emergency preparedness, and that has some tips for people to build their own kit. Certainly, the parts and pieces that are included in building your own kit are recommended. If you don't have the ability to get some of the items, certainly there's other opportunities or other things that could fit in and take the place of some of those items. I believe when we did our emergency preparedness week, we definitely had some of our service providers there that were helping people and talking them through the ability to build the kits and talk about the kits. I know the fire department has done some activities related to building kits and how to build them, and providing some information as to where you can get some of those supplies. Definitely, the federal government and the provincial government also do have resources that we can certainly update some of our information to point people in that direction too, as they do have a lot of information about those types of things. And certainly it's something that we can talk about in this coming up year about, is there an opportunity or a program that we can offer to assist people in building those kits, and coming up with some more affordable opportunities for those that may not have the means or the ability to do so on their own.
Thank you, General Manager.
Your Worship, may I just follow up?
Go ahead.
Yeah, question is, maybe this is potentially an opportunity for education on social media using like our Smarty Pants, type of a scenario where we're teaching people how to do these types of things, because that seemed to work very well in terms of educating the public of specific tasks to do. And I'm just wondering, because I really can't see how we're going to get everybody, to a knowledge level where we are protected as a community and our members have the things that they require in the event that we do have an emergency.
Yes, go ahead.
Your Worship, just to follow up on that one, we did produce a guidebook also, and that had a great deal more information than just a 72-hour kit. So certainly that book is being put on our webpage in addition to the 72-hour kit. We did print a number of copies of those and provide them to some of our community partners in terms of grocery stores and had them handed out to a large number of our population. So that guidance and resource does.
General Manager, if I may.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just 1 second, Trevor. So that certainly does exist in the community. And go ahead, Trevor.
Your worship, through we've given out thousands of our Town of Stony Plain emergency guidebook. It's been very well received in the time that we've been promoting it. Do talks to condo associations, boards like that, and definitely promote the emergency preparedness, and it's very, very well received. And conversation with them, always passing that out. Typically here in the fire station, we're putting 1,000 youth and adults through our fire prevention program, and it's kind of two-tiered. It's the fire prevention is aimed at the children, and the emergency preparedness is aimed at the adults. So we do get a good broad spectrum of ability. As General Manager alluded to, we weren't able to do anything in person last year or this year for Emergency Preparedness Day, but the ones that we have conducted in the past, it's been very well received and able to reach a lot of people. As far as the 72-hour kits, we're borrowing some information from Alberta Emergency Management Agency. They've got little videos that we'll be posting daily on social media and on our too, and one of them is how to build a low-cost emergency preparedness kit. So fairly well suited for your question.
Sounds great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Maybe I'll ask the question before I go to see if anybody else has chimed in. In terms of the emergency preparedness week, it was mentioned that it was gaining some momentum and people were starting to enjoy it and actually understand it and having some kind of understanding of what it's all about and how to be more prepared. Last year, we understand that because of the pandemic and we weren't able to adjust fast enough. But this year, I was surprised that there was nothing done virtually in terms of a short video, a demonstration that we can still kind of promote emergency preparedness, but through a virtual means or through, not a full contact kind of venue. Was there any thought given to that? And if not, why not? And how can we, I wanted to spread this message and understanding to our residents, and we didn't take the opportunity to do something virtually for our residents.
Your Worship, it's I thank you for the question. It's a good question. I believe it probably was something that we just didn't give a lot of thought to be quite honest. Certainly dealing with the pandemic is taken a lot of energy and resources related to that. We do have some existing videos that were taken in previous years that certainly can be shared, as that the information is relevant. I think the last time we did it in person, there was a lot of communication about sprinklers and kits and emergency management as a general topic. So we do have some information that has been developed in the past that certainly could be shared and continue to be shared and is still relevant, as is the information on our webpage and the guidebook that was developed. So definitely, I think our focus has been on COVID-19, and it's not an excuse, but certainly that's where things have been. And a lot of places in the Edmonton region are certainly in that game right now, and emergency preparedness and this week has certainly been a little less vocal or a little less energetic than what it has in typical weeks and typical years. And that's not an excuse. It's simply, we missed the boat on that for sure.
Okay. Thank you, and I appreciate the fact that we have some videos and stuff that we can share out a little bit more, especially during this week, and hopefully, like many of our other communications topics that Council has been kind of updated on, and the communications plan that emergency emergency preparedness is not just a one weekly thing. I think we need to just build it into our overall corporate communications throughout the year, and just with a focus on it for this 1 week, but then just to have it kind of refresher throughout every quarter, just so that residents are prepared for any emergencies that might arise in the future. Members of council, any other questions, comments? Okay, see none. Thank you very much. Councillor Laurie, if I can just ask you to make the motion to accept for information, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that Town Council accept the emergency management update for information.
Okay. Members of council, any questions regarding the motion to accept for information? See none. I'll call a question. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, that's 7 hands in favor.
Okay. Thank you very much. And move on to information items and council discussion. So members of council, anything to update the rest of council on, or senior administration, or just a question or concern that you've been addressed by a resident? I'll start with Councillor Bennett.
Gee, I have nothing this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Plechko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to comment on the development that's going on within our community. I had a chance on Sunday to drive around our community, and there's a number of new homes being built within our community, and it's always good to see that type of thing happening here. And I'm looking forward to the construction that's about to begin on 779 in downtown.
Thank you. Councillor Meyer.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick one on the corner of Golf Course and is it Oatway? There is our school division has a school bus parked there advertising traffic safety. I don't disapprove of that message. What I have a concern of is it's on the side of an old rusty bus. And I have the feeling that it's much like a safety poster in a workplace that has had its time in the sun. If we don't change the message, it can kind of just be lost in the background. And like I say, it is also on the side of a rusty old bus. So maybe we could talk to our school division about either brushing that up or moving it along. Anyhow, just my thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Meyer. So that is the corner of Golf Course and Bright Bank. Administration, if you can just look at and just provide this a little email update for us, that'd be appreciated. Okay, moving on to Councillor Matties.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have anything for this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just two quick things. First, a comment. Happy to see our transit launch today. We're officially in the transit business, so hopefully we see some good uptick on our usership of that. The second is just in regards to washroom facilities for the Umbach off-leash park. I believe in the past there has been porta potties placed there, and I'm assuming because of the COVID-19 pandemic, those facilities have been removed. I'm just curious in respect to a justification wise, there certainly is not a public bathroom anywhere accessible near the Umbach off-leash park, and given the number of people and the needs of people that attend there, I'm just curious as to if there's been consideration of placing one there, even if we have to put signage up to state that it is not cleaned and sanitized after every use, and for users to be aware. I'm sure we could also provide a sanitizer station within it. Is that something that administration is considering, or just curious what the thoughts are on that?
Thank you. It was a good comment about the Stony Plain Transit. Had its first inaugural run today. But yeah, in terms of the Umbach off-leash park, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will maybe just open that up to one of the general managers that may understand the situation better than I do out there. If we've had any discussion about that or what have you. I'm believing maybe our general manager of CAPS, but I'll just leave it open, and whoever wants to jump in can jump in and comment on that.
Your Worship, it's General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure. I'm not aware of the situation with the washroom, the porta potty at Umbuk. We'll check into that and get back to council and with what the situation is.
Thank you very much, General Manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. And again, I would go further than just the Umbak Off-Leash Park as well. Many youth sporting organizations are able to still operate under restrictions, just with different measures and so on and so forth. So I know seasonally we would also be placing some out at various sports fields, etc. So I'm just hoping we can have a look at that program and make sure we can provide these facilities out in our community as much as possible.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to Deputy Mayor, anything for council discussion, information items?
No, sir, nothing this evening.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, members of council, again, as you noticed, the residential street cleaning has begun. That means all the arterial roads have been completed. Again, to all our residents, please watch for signs. Usually the signs are up there the day before, probably within 24 hours or so. So if you do see no parking signs in your subdivision, please do your best to move your vehicle off the road. It does make it easier and more efficient for our street cleaners to come and get that done. As well, next Sunday is Mother's Day. So if you had no plans or you forgot about it, I'm just reminding you now. You know, we can do a lot of things, but our mothers are our #1 cheerleaders. So make sure you do something nice for mom. Okay, with that, that ends our council information and council discussion. We want to close session. Again, members of the public that are watching, the closed session is for members of council and personnel that are related to the topic. No motions are made within the closed session except for the motion to come out. On the screen, you'll see an email address. So if you are participating and would like to be notified when council comes out of closed session, please send an email to that address to be asked to be notified, and we will notify you when council comes out. Okay. With that, I'll need a motion to go into camera. Closed session. Councillor Meyer, please.
Yep, I make a motion to move into closed session to discuss per FOIP section 16 and 24, 8.1 land purchase.
Thank you very much, Councillor Meyer. I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, that's 7 hands in favor.
Okay, and thank you very much. And before we go into closed session, I'm going to call a 10-minute recess so we can have the proper personnel in and out of the meeting that is required. Thank you. So we'll see everybody back at 6:56 to go into the closed session. Thank you and welcome back to Council Chambers. We did have a closed session and the only motion that was made by Councillor Bennett to come out of closed session, and that was carried unanimously 7-0. Administration, before we went into closed session, there was an email address put on the slideshow for members that were watching. Did anybody send an email that they wanted to be notified that council has come out of closed session?
Good evening, Your Worship. There were no requests made.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, then we're moving on to number 9 of our agenda, which is adjournment. So thank you very much for administrative staff and members of council for being here tonight and having your thinking caps on. Definitely appreciate it, and have a good evening and enjoy the sun.
Have a good
Good
evening,
night, all.
everyone.
Good night, guys.
Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.